Among history's most remarkable figures are the two women who, in collaboration with the Nazi regime, played a role in the destruction of countless Jewish families. Irma Grese. She was infamous for her brutality and sadistic acts in concentration camps like Auschwitz and Bergen-Belsen. Her most notorious actions were selecting victims to be sent to the gas chambers and her extreme cruelty towards prisoners, which included physical punishment and torturing them mentally and physically. She was directly responsible for sending many Jews to their deaths, adding to the suffering of the Holocaust survivors. Stella Goldschlag. Her central crime was betraying Jewish families to the Gestapo. She became one of the most feared informants in Nazi Germany, known for her ability to infiltrate and trap Jews in hiding, resulting in their arrest, torture, and death. She exploited her Jewish background and used her position to facilitate the capture and deportation of hundreds of her fellow Jews. On April 15, 1945, southwest of Bergen, British soldiers from the 11th Armored Division arrived at Bergen-Belsen, one of the worst concentration camps run by Nazi Germany during World War II. What they found was beyond horrifying: around 13,000 unburied bodies and nearly 60,000 sick and starving prisoners. Many of these prisoners were too weak to recover, and thousands more would die from diseases like typhus and tuberculosis in the following months. The British forces immediately took control of the camp and captured the Nazi officers, including both male and female personnel, who had allowed these terrible conditions to happen. As a form of justice, the British troops forced these Nazi guards to help bury the bodies in mass graves. Among those captured was Irma Grese, a young woman who had become infamous for her cruelty. The liberation of Bergen-Belsen was a crucial moment in history because it exposed the true horrors of the Nazi regime to the world. The images and reports from the camp shocked people everywhere and served as undeniable proof of the suffering caused by the Holocaust. Irma Grese was born on October 7, 1923, in Reschen, a small village that was part of the Weimar Republic, the government of Germany between 1918 and 1933. She was the third of 5 children in a working-class family. Her parents, Alfred and Berta Grese, were dairy workers who struggled to make a living. When Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party took control of Germany in January of 1933, they used propaganda to spread their ideas. Schools and youth programs, like the Hitler Youth and the League of German Girls, were designed to teach children about Nazi beliefs. Irma wanted to join these groups, but her father, who strongly opposed the Nazis, refused to let her. However, since Nazi ideas were taught in schools, Irma was still influenced by their messages. Irma's childhood was marked by tragedy. In 1936, when she was 13, her mother took her own life after discovering that her husband was having an affair. After this, her father raised the children alone. He was very strict and often used physical punishment to discipline them. These hardships shaped Irma's early years and may have influenced her later actions. As a child in Germany during the 1930s, Irma Grese was surrounded by Nazi propaganda. Even though her father disliked the Nazi Party, she could not escape its influence. Schools were filled with messages praising Adolf Hitler, and classrooms displayed his portrait. Teachers used Nazi-approved textbooks to teach students about obedience, militarism, racism, and anti-Semitism. Irma struggled in school and was often bullied by other students. She eventually dropped out at the age of 14. After leaving school, she worked on a farm for 6 months before moving to the town of Lucien, where she found a job in a retail store. However, she did not stay long. In 1939, when she was 15, Irma joined the staff at the Hohenleichen Sanatorium, a medical facility where she trained as an assistant nurse. The sanatorium's leader, Karl Gebhardt, was a Nazi doctor who later performed cruel medical experiments on concentration camp prisoners. Irma wanted to become a full-time nurse, but because she struggled academically, she was sent to work at a dairy farm in F. Erstenberg in 1941 instead. This decision would soon lead her into the world of concentration camps. Irma Grese's life changed forever in July of 1942 when she was sent to Ravensbrück, a concentration camp for women. Opened in May of 1939, Ravensbrück was one of for female prisoners in Nazi Germany. More than 132,000 women from different countries were imprisoned there, and over 92,000 died from starvation, disease, forced labor, and executions. At Ravensbrück, Irma trained under Dorothea Binz, a high-ranking female officer known for her extreme cruelty. The training program taught women how to control and punish prisoners. The main goal of guards like Irma was to push prisoners to work as hard as possible until they collapsed. Ravensbrück also became a center for medical experiments. Under the leadership of Karl Gebhardt, Nazi doctors performed horrifying procedures on prisoners, including breaking bones, infecting wounds, and testing new medicines without anesthesia. Many women died, while others were left with permanent injuries. Irma was exposed to this brutal environment at just 18 years old. Some believe this experience played a major role in shaping her into one of the most feared figures in the concentration camps. In March of 1943, at the age of 19, Irma Grese was transferred to Auschwitz-Birkenau, one of the largest and most infamous Nazi concentration camps. Located in German-occupied Poland, Birkenau had electrified fences, armed guards, and separate sections for different prisoners. It served as both a forced labor camp and a site for mass executions, with thousands of prisoners being sent to gas chambers every day. At first, Irma had small responsibilities, such as handling phone calls and supervising prisoners working inside the camp. However, over time, she gained more authority. By May of 1944, she became the senior guard of a section called Camp C, where she was in charge of 6 or 7 female guards. Camp C was overcrowded, with nearly 30,000 prisoners crammed into small barracks that lacked proper beds or sanitation. Irma became known for carrying a whip and brutally punishing prisoners for small infractions. She enjoyed enforcing harsh rules, often beating inmates or forcing them to stand for hours as punishment. Her growing power made her one of the most feared figures at Auschwitz. Irma Grese quickly gained a reputation at Auschwitz-Birkenau for her extreme cruelty. Survivors later described her as one of the most brutal guards in the camp. She was often seen carrying a leather whip, which she used to beat prisoners for minor reasons, and would kick prisoners who were too weak to stand. Many prisoners feared Irma not just because of her violence, but also because she participated in selecting women to be sent to the gas chambers. She was often seen alongside Nazi Dr. Josef Mengele during these selections. Some survivors claimed she targeted young, attractive women out of jealousy. Others believed she had romantic relationships with high-ranking Nazi officers, including Mengele and Camp Commandant Joseph Kramer. Irma was also accused of being involved in disturbing activities. Survivors alleged that she had inappropriate relationships with both male and female prisoners. Some said that once she lost interest in these prisoners, she would send them to their deaths. Although some details remain unproven, the testimony from former prisoners painted a picture of a sadistic and ruthless woman who took pleasure in the suffering of others. In January of 1945, as Soviet forces approached Auschwitz-Birkenau, the Nazis forced thousands of prisoners to march long distances in freezing weather. Irma Grese left Auschwitz and was sent to Ravensbrück before being transferred to Bergen-Belsen in March of 1945. Bergen-Belsen was overcrowded and had little food or clean water. Disease spread rapidly, and hundreds of prisoners died every day from starvation and sickness. Instead of helping, Irma continued her cruel treatment of prisoners. She still carried her whip and would beat anyone who disobeyed orders. Survivors recalled that she forced starving prisoners to do physical exercises, such as running or kneeling for hours, even in the snow. At Bergen-Belsen, Irma was seen kicking and hitting prisoners who were already weak and dying. Some witnesses even described her knocking prisoners' heads together as punishment. Despite the worsening conditions, she showed no mercy. Her reign of terror ended on April 15, 1945, when British soldiers liberated the camp. Irma was captured along with other Nazi guards and taken into custody. Soon, she would face justice for her crimes. On April 15, 1945, British soldiers liberated Bergen-Belsen and arrested the remaining Nazi guards, including Irma Grese. She showed no remorse for her actions and even defended the Nazi policies. When asked why she treated prisoners so cruelly, she claimed it was her duty. Irma was put on trial in September of 1945 during the Belsen trial, where she faced charges for her crimes at Auschwitz-Birkenau and Bergen-Belsen. Many survivors testified against her, describing the brutal beatings, harsh punishments, and cruel selections for the gas chambers. Despite her denial of some accusations, the evidence against her was overwhelming. On November 17, 1945, the British military tribunal found her guilty and sentenced her to death. At just 22 years old, she became the youngest woman to be executed under British law in the 20th century. On December 13, 1945, she was hanged by executioner Albert Pierre Point. Her last word before she died was schnell, meaning quickly in German. In the early years of the 1930s, Germany underwent drastic political changes. Adolf Hitler became chancellor in January 1933, and his Nazi government quickly introduced laws that targeted Jewish people. One of the first major laws, the Law for the Restoration of the Professional Civil Service, was passed in April of that year. This law forced Jewish professionals out of their jobs, marking the beginning of widespread discrimination. As time passed, more restrictions were placed on Jewish families. They were banned from many public places, removed from schools, and faced increasing violence. By 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jewish citizens of their rights, making them outsiders in their own country. This growing hostility forced many to consider fleeing, but strict immigration policies made it nearly impossible. For those who remained, life became increasingly dangerous, setting the stage for the horrors of World War II. Stella Goldschlag was born on July 10, 1922, in Berlin, which was then part of the Weimar Republic. She grew up in a middle-class Jewish family that was well integrated into German society. Her parents, Gerhard and Antony Goldschlag, were cultured individuals. Her father was a conductor, composer, and journalist, while her mother had once pursued a career as a singer before settling into family life. Despite facing financial difficulties at times, Stella enjoyed a happy childhood. Her parents affectionately called her Little Dot because she was the center of their world. She attended the Hohenzollern High School for girls and later enrolled at the prestigious Goldschmidt School after Jewish students were barred from public education. At school, Stella was known for her striking looks. She had blonde hair, blue eyes, and a tall, slender figure that made her stand out. Many compared her to Hollywood actresses, and she was admired by her classmates. However, as the Nazi regime grew stronger, her life would change drastically. The growing anti-Jewish policies meant her future was filled with uncertainty, setting the stage for the difficult choices she would later make. As the Nazi government passed more anti-Jewish laws, life for Stella Goldschlag and her family became increasingly difficult. In 1933, her father, Gerhard Goldschlag, lost his job due to new policies that banned Jewish professionals from many industries. This sudden unemployment left the family struggling financially. By 1935, the Nuremberg laws stripped Jewish people of their citizenship and basic rights. Stella, like other Jewish children, was forced to leave her school and enroll in the Goldschmidt School, which was one of the few institutions still accepting Jewish students. The Goldschlags lived in constant fear as their freedoms were taken away, and they were barred from many public spaces. Despite their worsening situation, Stella's family tried to remain hopeful. However, their options were shrinking rapidly. Their once normal life in Berlin was slipping away, and the threat of deportation loomed over them. On the night of November 9, 1938, a violent wave of attacks against Jewish communities swept across Germany. Known as Kristallnacht, or the Night of Broken Glass, Nazi supporters vandalized Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues. Thousands of Jewish men, including Stella Goldschlag's father, Gerhard, were arrested and sent to concentration camps. Fearing for their safety, the Goldschlag family desperately tried to leave Germany. However, immigration policies in many countries were strict, and obtaining a visa required significant money or political connections, neither of which they had. The United States consulate informed them that it could take years before they were granted entry. With no other options, the family was forced to remain in Berlin. As Nazi persecution intensified, their chances of survival decreased. Stella, once a promising young woman with dreams of a bright future, was now trapped in a country that wanted to erase her existence. By the early 1940s, life for Jewish families in Germany had become unbearable. In September 1941, the Nazis ordered all Jewish citizens to wear the Star of David on their clothing, marking them as targets for discrimination. Around the same time, Stella Goldschlag was forced to work in a munitions factory, producing supplies for the German war effort. This job temporarily protected her from deportation, but the danger was never far away. Despite the hardships, Stella found brief happiness when she married Manfred K. Blair, the leader of a Jewish jazz band. However, their time together was short-lived. During the fabrication in February 1943, Manfred was arrested and sent to Auschwitz. Stella never saw him again. With her husband gone and the Nazis hunting Jews more aggressively than ever, Stella and her parents were forced to go into hiding, fearing for their lives. On February 27, 1943, the Nazi regime launched Fabric Action, a large-scale operation to arrest the remaining Jewish forced laborers in Berlin. Stella Goldschlag and her mother managed to escape the initial raid by hiding, but their luck did not last long. A few months later, Stella was recognized by an informant and captured by the Gestapo. The Nazis suspected that Stella had connections to the underground resistance, particularly a forger named G. Enter Rogoff, who helped create false identification papers for Jewish citizens. To extract information, the Gestapo subjected Stella to brutal torture. Her captors beat her so severely that her legs were nearly broken and she bled from her mouth, nose, and ears. They pressed a gun to her head and threatened to kill her. Despite her suffering, Stella had no useful information to give. However, the Nazis saw potential in her. Her striking blonde hair and Aryan features made her appear German, and they realized she could be useful in their efforts to capture hidden Jews. With her life hanging in the balance, Stella was offered a terrible choice: continue suffering in prison or collaborate with the Gestapo. After enduring brutal torture at the hands of the Gestapo, Stella Goldschlag was given a terrible ultimatum: continue suffering in prison or work for the Nazis to capture hidden Jews. Desperate to save herself and her parents from deportation, she agreed to become a catcher, hunting down Jews in hiding and turning them over to the Gestapo. Stella quickly became one of the most effective informants in Berlin. She used her knowledge of Jewish families and her connections from the Goldschmidt School to track down those in hiding. The Nazis rewarded her with money, privileges, and promises of safety. She was allowed to move freely without wearing the Star of David and carried papers identifying her as a Gestapo agent. Her actions soon earned her the nickname the Blonde Poison. While many Jews tried to avoid capture, Stella had a way of gaining their trust before betraying them. She was relentless in her pursuit, searching addresses, visiting cemeteries, and even attending Jewish gatherings to identify those living in secret. The exact number of people she helped capture remains unknown, but estimates suggest she was responsible for hundreds of arrests, sealing the fates of many. As Stella Goldschlag continued working for the Gestapo, she became one of the most feared figures within the Jewish community in Berlin. Her former friends and classmates at the Goldschmidt School no longer saw her as an ally, but as a ruthless betrayer. She exploited her knowledge of Jewish families, leading the Nazis to hiding places across the city. Many trusted her, believing she was also in danger, only to be handed over to the authorities. Stella's methods were calculated and effective. She would often gain the trust of Jews living in secret by pretending to be on the run herself. Once she had enough information, she would alert the Gestapo, who would then raid the hiding spots and arrest entire families. She searched purses, took address books, and followed any lead that could result in more captures. Even the resistance feared her. Survivors recalled how her reputation spread. Some believed she had a near-supernatural ability to find hidden Jews. By the time the war was nearing its end, Stella had been responsible for the arrests of hundreds, if not thousands, of her own people, making her one of the most infamous collaborators in Nazi Germany. As World War II came to an end in April 1945, Stella Goldschlag knew her time as a Gestapo informant was over. With the Soviet army advancing on Berlin, she went into hiding, hoping to escape the consequences of her actions. However, she was soon arrested by Soviet forces, who quickly discovered her role in betraying fellow Jews. Initially, Stella attempted to portray herself as a victim of the Nazis, claiming she had been forced to work for the Gestapo. However, when she was handed over to the Jewish community in Berlin for identification, survivors immediately recognized her. Enraged, they nearly attacked her before the Soviets took her back into custody. She was put on trial by a Soviet tribunal, where she was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor. For the first time, Stella faced real punishment for her actions. After serving 10 years in a Soviet labor camp, Stella Goldschlag was released in 1956 and returned to West Berlin. However, her past quickly caught up with her. Survivors and the media exposed her crimes, leading to a new trial in West Germany. The public was horrified to learn about her betrayal, and newspapers referred to her as the Blonde Witch and the Blonde Venom. During the trial, Stella claimed she was a victim of circumstances, arguing that she had only cooperated with the Gestapo to save her parents. However, witnesses described her as a willing and enthusiastic collaborator who went beyond what was required. The court acknowledged that fear may have driven her initial actions, but condemned the extent of her involvement. She was sentenced to another 10 years in prison, but since she had already served that time in Soviet custody, she remained free. After her trial, Stella Goldschlag lived a lonely and isolated life. She struggled to find acceptance in society, as both Jews and non-Jews despised her for her past actions. Over the years, she became openly anti-Semitic, blaming the Jewish people for her downfall. Despite converting to Christianity and marrying multiple times, she never escaped her reputation. As she aged, her health and mental state declined. She spent her final years living in solitude, rejected even by her daughter. On October 26, 1994, at the age of 72, Stella Goldschlag ended her life by drowning herself in a pond in Freiburg. Her story remains one of history's most disturbing betrayals. What do you think about Irma Grese? Was she a sadistic figure who thrived on cruelty? Or was she simply a product of the brutal Nazi regime? What do you think about Stella Goldschlag? Was she a victim of circumstance, forced to betray her own people for survival? Or was she a willing collaborator who exploited her position for personal gain? Please let us know in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more historical insights. Thank you so much for watching.